On this episode of Still Loading.
Store's closed. Not for me, pal. You might say I'm Spyro's hot co-star. I love that little dragon. The way he blows fire at sheep like me. This is an official protest. I am an anti-Spyro activist.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, we are diving into one of Insomniac's legendary games, part of one of their legendary series, the first game in their legendary series. And of course, if you have not read the title yet, I am talking about the original Spyro the Dragon game. Joining me to break down this iconic game is my good friend, Chris, aka the British Bond Addict. Chris, how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me on, and what is it? Thanks for releasing me. He says they all say constantly. I'm not doing too badly, and I cannot wait to talk. This is every time I come on your podcast to talk about video games. It's all games I absolutely love, so it's just the best time.
Well, I'm happy to have you on for that. All I ask of my guest is that you're either knowledgeable or passionate, and you happen to be both, so it works out very well. I'm excited to chat about this. Normally, you're on my Still Bonding stuff. You've essentially become the unofficial co-host as my original one. Unfortunately, had a lot of personal stuff come up in their life, which still praying for him and sending him good vibes and all that good stuff. But in the meantime, you have essentially become the co-host for Still Bonding. But of course, I have to have you on to talk about some of your favorite games. You were last on, Chris, for Super Mario Galaxy, and prior to that, you were on my Tomorrow Never Dies episode.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I'd say there's an interesting link between this game and Tomorrow Never Dies, which I'm sure we'll come into a little bit later.
Well, our first section here is all about personal memories and how you first kind of discovered this game and like what your personal attachment to the game is. So if it fits into there, by all means, Chris, how did you first get introduced to our purple friend here, and when did you first play this game?
Well, that was good timing for me to bring that up. The first time I remembered playing Spyro, it was a weekend where it was basically me, my brother, and my dad. My mum was out on a girls' trip or something or other. And we went to the Blockbuster and we rented a few games. And I picked Tomorrow Never Dies as my game. My brother picked, I think, a racing game as his. I don't remember too clearly because I didn't play it. And then we also picked up Spyro 2. I didn't know about Spyro at the time. I was only about, 7 or 8 years old or so. And we played that game and we just fell in love with it. Absolutely loved playing Spyro 2. So much so that we had to return it after like 3 days or so. And we immediately bought the game. Like, the parents saw how much we loved it and they went out and bought it for us. And I played that game to death. And then a couple of years later, with Spyro 2 firmly in my head, we were down in, I think, Woolworths in the UK. And there was the original Spyro game, which we hadn't seen in any of our shops nearby. I mean, this is way before online shopping. Mm-hmm. And we picked it up. And just like with Spyro 2, we loved Spyro 1. Eventually got Spyro 3 when it came out. We got that the Christmas year it came out, which I think was 2000. Yeah, Year of the Dragon. It's just every experience I've had with Spyro has been an absolutely phenomenal one. And it's one very much rooted in childhood, but it's one that I still come back to and appreciate a lot, especially with the Reignited trilogy, which came out only a few years ago.
Yeah, and I heard the Reignited trilogy was really good. A lot of people really enjoyed it. Did you play the Reignited trilogy?
I played it so much. It's one of those things. When they released the Insane trilogy for Crash Bandicoot, I was excited, but all I was thinking was, now do Spyro. This has been popular, do Spyro. For the love of God, do Spyro. And it's possibly one of the most faithful recreations I've ever played. I know it's essentially a remake, for want of... what's it called when they just ramp up? A
remaster. I would say it's a remaster. Yeah, like an HD remaster.
Yeah, it's like that, but from the ground up. So it's all new, different. It's all new, environments, but modeled on the old ones, and it's so well done. And it was just it was just like playing the original games, but with these insanely good PS4 graphics. It did miss out on some of the charm, I find, that some of the older Spyro games have, but it was still a fantastic experience, and I couldn't stop myself playing that game.
I really wish I would have experienced this game when I was a kid. Actually, my personal experience with it was I don't have any until I
Oh,
beat it earlier this year. That's actually why I forget when we were talking about it, but you had mentioned to me in passing that you were a big Spyro fan. And I was like, oh, that's convenient. I literally just beat it for the first time earlier this year on stream. So I don't think any of those videos are still up on my Twitch. But if you want to watch me stream games periodically, twitch.tv/still loading pod. Anyway, so I beat this game on Twitch, and my own memories of the game prior to actually playing it and beating it for the first time. When I first moved out, my roommate at the time was playing through it again, and I watched him play it a little bit. And prior to that, it was the commercials as a kid, which listeners would have heard a snippet from one of them in the little tagline at the beginning here. Yeah, I would actually watch I remember the commercials, that stupid freaking burnt sheep that was this almost like Jim Henson animatronic Muppet that had some uncanny valley vibes going on with it, where it just made me super uncomfortable even as a kid to watch. It just didn't look natural. I understand that was part of the joke. It was just this like animatronic human human in an animatronic sheep suit, but it still just looks goofy. And I actually sent you the link prior to recording. Do you remember those commercials?
We didn't have them in the UK. We had a different set of
Oh, you lucky devil,
adverts.
you.
I must say, I know the Five Nights at Freddy's film's coming out soon. That sheep would not have looked out of place in it.
No, especially those eyes, man. Like I still have it paused at like 27 seconds of the one commercial where like the clip that I used, listeners, is from there's a sheep coming into a store, and it's like, oh, Spyro is my best friend. I love it. And then he goes, I'm an anti-Spyro activist, and he handcuffs himself to a store shelf, which honestly just looks like an E3 display, not even a store shelf.
Mm.
And then the security guard sicks his dog on him, and it's just endlessly amusing. It's really funny to see it. But yeah, so that's all my experience with Spyro, which is very little, basically none. So the game was released on September 9th, 1998 in North America. It came out in Europe in October of 98. It was Insomniac Games' second ever game. The first game was a first-person shooter called Disruptor, which was a kind of a Doom clone. It was pretty well received by critics at the time, but commercially it pretty much flopped. It sold under 500,000 copies, which was not anywhere near where they were hoping for their first game. And Insomniac Games founder Ted Price was nervous that their recent partnership with Universal Games or Universal Interactive was going to sour because of it. They were going to lose that partnership and the help that Universal was giving them, because originally Disruptor was actually going to be made for the 3DO, or maybe I think it was the 3DO, not the CDI. It was going to be for the 3DO, but when the 3DO started tanking, they basically were like, well, fuck, what are we going to do? And they switched over development to the PS1, which Universal bankrolled the PS1 dev kits for them, which was super important because before that, the reason why it was even being made for the 3DO Disruptor was because they could not afford PS1 dev kits. So Universal bankrolled those dev kits, which then put Disruptor on their system, or put Disruptor on the PS1. And critics loved it. It was a really good Doom clone. Doom clone might be giving it a little bit of a disservice, but it was a really good first-person shooter. And Mark Cerny, who was the head of Universal Interactive at the time, really liked what they did. And Mark Cerny now is better known. Well, he's made a bunch of games. He made Marble Madness prior to working at Universal Interactive. He also was the lead designer for the PS4, like the system, the PS4. So he's pretty influential in the games industry. I should probably do a whole episode on his history in general. But he kind of advised Insomniac, hey, the average age of the gamer playing a PlayStation is going down. Nintendo style games, Banjo-Kazooie, Mario 64, that all is selling insanely well. So maybe try a game that has more mass market appeal, something a little bit more kid-friendly. And they initially had an idea, Ted Price had an idea for a, what was it, a game about aliens invading Earth, and that was shot down pretty quickly. But I still found that pretty amusing because if you think about it, Insomniac Games made the Resistance games on the PS3, which is about aliens invading Earth. So
Yeah.
I can't say for certain. This is a theory. I did not read this anywhere. I'm just speculating. This is pure speculation that maybe that was like kind of like the seeds of what would eventually become the Resistance series, but I
Yeah.
don't know for certain. The reason they ended up going with a game based around dragons was actually their I believe it was the head of animation, it was the art director, excuse me, was Craig Stitt, and he pitched an idea for a game with dragons, and I quote the reason why he chose dragons, and I quote, "I've always loved dragons. To me, they are the greatest creature, the combination of a T-Rex with wings and breathing fire. I mean, you've got the best of everything in a dragon." And if that doesn't sell you on dragons, man, I don't know what to tell you.
I'm sold. Absolutely sold. I love that kind of being the inspiration behind the choice instead of it just being, oh, what's going to be good for audiences, what's going to be cute. I love that, like, inside, like, personally, there's actually a bit of like, these things are kind of badass. I want to make a game about that.
Yeah, they kind of combined something they were interested in with the direction that their publisher was wanting them to take, which was, a more family friendly game.
Yeah.
And they came up with Spyro. Though the original name, do you know what the original name of Spyro was going to be, Chris?
I know it was Pyro for a bit, but they thought that was too adult, wasn't it?
Yes.
It's something really weird. Like there's an original one, like I don't know, it's like a bizarrely human name, like Dave or something.
Yes, it was. No, it was going to be Pete.
Ah, that's it.
But they, the lawyers of kind of smartly so, the Universal lawyers was like, hold the phone. Disney owns a movie called Pete's Dragon, and you're making a game
Oh,
about a dragon named Pete. We're going to get sued.
yeah.
We're
You wouldn't get
going
very
to get
sued.
sued to hell and back. So,
Especially as I know early on they wanted Spyro to be green, but it blended with the grass. They didn't do it. Isn't Pete's Dragon also green?
mhm.
Yeah, that would
Yes,
be
Pete's
an issue.
Dragon is also green. Yep, and it makes sense though that exactly like you said, they changed Spyro's color to purple so that way he would stand out better on the green grass. And in all honesty, I think purple's a better color for him. Like a green dragon would have been a little bit too generic. Purple would have really, I think it really helps him stand out.
Well, the thing is, purple is my favorite color, so I absolutely love the choice they made, and I don't know, maybe it influenced why purple is one of my favorite colors. Actually, I say that my actual favorite color.
Is it your favorite color?
Yep, because of the podcast, I'm actually
Okay.
wearing one of my numerous purple ties. And those of you who have seen my Instagram know I'm obsessed with ties. My standout color tie is purple. I mean, I'm looking at my computer screen right now. My Google backdrop is purple.
I had no idea. See, my favorite color alternates between blue and green. I know it's kind of generic, but green because I like forests and woods and whatnot, and blue just because I like the color blue. I don't really know.
Yeah, that's the thing. When my sponsor in motor racing picked me up and they said they're gonna let me design a helmet, fund it, and my race suit, I initially wanted it to be all purple, but that didn't match with their logo, so they made me go blue and white, which may be some of the most generic racing colors ever.
Wait, were you a sponsored racer?
Yes, I was. Do I ever bring it up?
No, you've never brought this up.
Oh wait, do you actually not? I mean, do you not know that?
No,
Oh yeah,
I had
back
no idea.
any races I do in the UK, I've got a sponsor. And if the pictures of me, if I get onto a podium and the pictures circulate on social media, they pay me. And the first part they did, they let me design my race helmet and bought it, and design my fire suit, and they bought that as well, which was a hefty amount of money between the two. So I ended up turning my helmet into something that looks a bit like a Union Jack design, because blue is obviously quite a big color in the Union flag. So yeah, initially I wanted it to be purple and maybe purple and black, but they were like, nope, our logo is blue and white, and we want you to be blue and white. And because they're paying me a lot of money, I didn't really have the opportunity to say no.
Yeah, probably. Not much you can argue with there. That's wild. I had no idea.
Yeah, no, I've been last races I did were over the summer when I went back to the UK. It's a bit trickier to find races in America so far, but I'm not giving up. But yeah, no, I've been doing motor racing for about 10 years at this point and was sponsored and still technically am for about 7 of those.
I had no idea. Learn something new every day.
There you
All
go.
right, but back to Spyro, back to he doesn't race cars, so that's my transition back to Spyro.
Yeah, that was really fluid. I
That
like
was that was fluid, man.
that.
Unlike the fire that he breathes.
Oh,
uh, uh, such a stupid transition. Listeners, you're getting a Josh who is exhausted right now, so my transitions make no damn sense. But we're going to continue on. We're going to press on anyway. Some real quick hits again before we get into some of the discussion on gameplay. The voice of Spyro is Carlos Alazraqui. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. He is best known for being the voice of Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life.
Hmm.
Uh, One of my favorite cartoons growing up as a kid. He's done so many different things. But what's funny is Spyro did get replaced after this game by a different voice actor, Tom Kenny, who's the
Yep.
voice of SpongeBob.
And you
And
can
there's another
tell.
SpongeBob connection because Clancy Brown does the voice of a lot of dragons in the original Spyro game, and Clancy Brown is the voice of Mr. Krabs.
Mhm. That's the thing. I love that there's those two connections to start off with, but also you can hear early SpongeBob, especially in Spyro 2 in Hurricos, the
Hmm.
electro gears. That is just SpongeBob's voice.
I wonder if Nickelodeon was like, "Hey, you can't use that," but I guess it wasn't out yet.
No. I remember as well the first guy. I know I read somewhere he's trying to do like a voice that the voice of the kid that everyone liked or something like that is a really strange thing, which is weird because I think Spyro's voice in the first game is really grating.
Yeah, I don't really like it in this. I definitely don't. It's not one of
Where's
my.
Nasty York? I'm going after him.
Yeah, well, there's an interview I saw with Carlos talking about the decision, like, or what he was trying, different voices he was trying for Spyro. One was kind of like a, hey man, like a cool surfer bro, like a cool kid, and then the other one was like super nerdy. So he tried a balance of the two,
Hmm.
and I don't think it's necessarily Carlos's fault because I know he's a good voice actor. I would almost pin it more on the direction. And, this is one of the first games they did with voice acting. So I can't even really be mad at Insomniac for not necessarily knowing how to do everything correctly with it. And also, voice acting games was so new at the time.
Oh
There,
yeah.
there were some games that did it. Metal Gear Solid famously was one of the best. And I believe that came out the same year as this.
Hmm.
Um, so it's fine. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's fine. I would say actually the voice acting for the random dragons that you rescue is better than Spyro himself.
Yes. Thank you for releasing me.
It's so deadpan, but it works because you're not having a conversation with them.
I love the one in what is it? I think it's Beastmakers, where it's just thanks for rescuing me, Spyro, but now I've got to go. I get the feeling the voice actor knew that was a really shitty line and just decided to really go with it.
I guess so. It almost sounds like he's like, "Ooh, it's nice seeing you, but I gotta be hitting the old dusty trail."
Yeah,
Like
he's
just kind of like, I gotta go.
definitely an introvert who really don't want to spend a second more with Spyro than he had to.
I mean, with that voice, I wouldn't blame him. But yeah,
That's the point.
so
Spyro doesn't even talk in that cutscene, so he did it. He did his job effectively.
he's just like, "Shut up, kid. I don't want to talk to you."
Fuck off.
I hate children. No, I'm just imagine like that was like the behind the scenes where all the dragons, like after Spyro rescues them, you see behind the scenes things like, "Well, I'm happy to be free, but why did it have to be that fucking Spyro kid? I hate kids."
I know. I'm really glad for what he did, but my god, if I have to speak another word to that kid, I'm gonna vomit.
I'm just gonna breathe fire all over him. Gonna burn his ass. Oh my god. Yeah, so Spyro did much better for Insomniac Games. It sold an insane amount of units. It was critically very well received. And I mean, you can tell because there was two more sequels that came out for this game. And with all that said, let's go into this a little bit, shall we?
Yeah,
Oh,
let's do it.
actually, I'm sorry.
Oh,
One other thing to bring up: the design of Spyro, like the visual design, was designed by an artist named Charles M. Billis.
hmm.
Charles Billis also did the design of Crash Bandicoot.
Oh,
Sorry, Charles Zembillis, not M.
ah,
Billis, Zembillis.
there you go.
My apologies. Yes, he did the design of Crash Bandicoot. He also did some work on like the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon show.
Hmm.
He did character design on Captain N, tying it back to my series. Holy shit.
There you go.
And you know what else? To tie it back to one of our mutual loves,
Can't
he
wait
did
for
the
this.
character design of James Bond Jr.
Oh, no way.
Yep. His
generic,
last
generic brown head boy.
who is James Bond's nephew for some reason. Not
Yep.
a junior, not his actual junior, but somehow a nephew. He also apparently did work on Jack and Daxter and a couple other things. He also did work on a Christmas Carol, like the movie, a
Oh,
movie, an animated movie of a Christmas Carol from the 90s. I was trying to say, I'm like, wait, was it a video game? No. Yeah, so he was pretty big. He did a lot of stuff. He worked on the Secret of Nim. He worked on the TV show She-Ra, the Princess of Power in the 80s. He worked on a Where's Waldo cartoon. Like, he's done a ton of stuff. So he's super influential. And it was just kind of cool that, they got the same guy who did Crash Bandicoot, but for their game in 1998. And speaking of Crash, Insomniac and Naughty Dog literally worked in the same building. Their offices were across the hallway from
yep.
each other at the time. So that's why at the time you would see a lot of crossover between Naughty Dog games and Insomniac games. Like, you would see, Crash Bandicoot or Jack and Daxter appear as images in an Insomniac game, and then you would see Spyro or Ratchet and Clank appear as stuff in Jack and Daxter or Crash games. So
My
they
favorite
had a very
crossover.
close relationship with each other.
Yeah, my favorite crossover they had is that if you enter a code on the Crash Bandicoot 3 menu, it gives you a quick playable demo of Spyro, and if you put the same code on the Spyro menu, it gives you a demo of Crash Bandicoot 3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I actually read that. That's they were best friends, man. They
I
were
had a
best
cheat.
friends. It was awesome to see.
I had a PlayStation 1 cheat book from whatever magazine I had back in those days, and that was one of the cheats in it, and that blew my mind. I played both of the demos on both games, and I know it's interesting because I played the demo, I think, before I actually played Spyro 1. This is back still when I had Spyro 2. And there are loads of like level portals that were filled in, and then when I played the real game, I was like, it's open now. So stuff like that. And I think they actually like play tested each other's games at the time. So I think Insomniac were play testing Crash Bandicoot 3, whilst Naughty Dog were play testing Spyro 1.
I did not know that. That's kind of, I mean, I'm not surprised. They definitely worked hand in hand. And both of these developers are well renowned for their technical prowess with the systems they use on. Like Spyro, the reason why Spyro is so important for Sony and so important just in general is that up until the point when this game came out, there had not been an open world 3D platformer in the same vein of Mario 64 on the
Mm-hmm.
PlayStation. Like, yes, you had platformers, but Crash Bandicoot was basically linear. You would either go straight towards the camera, straight away from the camera, or left and right. There wasn't really like this exploratory element except for different paths.
Yeah.
Spyro, on the other hand, was a fully 3D world that you could explore, so much so that with his gliding ability you could jump off a super high perch in a level and completely glide over the rest of the level and explore the whole thing that way, if depending on the layout of it.
Yeah.
Now I feel like we should at least talk about what the setup of the plot is before we get into the gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
The basic setup for this game is obviously you play as the titular Spyro the Dragon. You live in the world of dragons, or the Dragon Kingdom, which consists of 5 different home worlds, which is the Artisans, the Peacekeepers, the Magic Crafters, the Beast Makers, and the Dream Weavers. And during a TV interview one day, a pair of dragons from the Artisan realm, this is from Wikipedia just to make it a little bit easier on myself, a pair of dragons from the Artisan realm catches the attention of Nasty Nork, a powerful Nork, which is a half gnome, half orc being who was banished from the kingdom due to his abrasive demeanor and sent to an abandoned junkyard, which he renamed Nasty's World. And Nasty is spelled Gnasty. And because they insulted him, he gets mad and he turns them all into basically crystal dragons, and he steals all their treasure. So you have to go around all the different worlds, the 5 home worlds, saving all of the different dragons, or as many are as required to progress, and then make it to Nasty Nork's world and defeat him. And that is the basic premise of the game. There's not a whole lot of story to it. I mean, that's pretty much it. Is there anything that I missed on that, Chris? Am I missing anything in this general overall plot?
No, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I mean, the TV interviewer, I guess you'd say, at the beginning calls him Gnasty Gnork, and is the only person in the entire Spyro franchise who ever does that. So you are pronouncing it correctly, which is fantastic, even though there are 2 G's there. Something that happens in this game is that he turns the dragon's gems into enemies. So when you defeat the enemy, you get a gem. They didn't in Spyro 2. They changed that, but then they reintroduced it for Spyro 3, and I think it's better in 1 and 3 than the way they did it in 2.
Good to know. Actually, you know what? Never mind. I'm not going to say a fun fact about 2 because I'm going to eventually do a Spyro 2 episode, so I should save the fun facts for Spyro 2 for that episode. But the overall gameplay is, Spyro has a bunch of different verbs in his moveset. You can breathe fire, you can charge, you can glide. Those are generally the 2 big verbs, or the 3 big verbs that you can do. You can jump. I think you can do a double jump as well. Can you do a double?
No,
No,
you can jump and glide in this one.
glide, yeah. So you can jump and glide. You can breathe fire, and you can charge. You do eventually get some power-ups that allow you to do a little bit more. There is like the supercharge, right?
Mm-hmm.
That pretty nuts. But what made the gameplay of this so impressive, like I said before, was its fully 3D rendered world, which was at the time on a PS1 was just absolutely unheard of. And the way that Insomniac did this was they pioneered a new system in the way that the game rendered the graphics. So when you are close to 3D architecture, it fully renders everything. When you are farther away, it basically does generic shapes. So that way, as you get closer to it, it puts in more detail in the textures. And so that way, it's only loading the detailed textures when you're right up next to it, as opposed to loading the detailed textures for the entire thing. So it was a really smart way of doing it, as essentially creating like a bubble around Spyro, where when you were within, as long as part of the world was within that bubble, the textures were fully rendered. You could see all the detail, and then outside of it, you could just see not quite silhouettes, but very toned down, just kind of general shapes and colors of what the landscape is supposed to be, which at the time was super impressive. So much so, the way they achieved that, I believe I read in an interview, 80% of the game was coded in assembly, which is just insane because assembly code is a lot more complex and hard to code in than say C# or C++ or something like that. And then the other percentage of it was coded in C, which according to an article I saw, it is slower, but it's still a lot faster than other modern languages like C#. And Alex Hastings, one of the programmers for the game, emphasized in the interview I read, where coding has changed so much. Then if a programmer working now would go back, then it would be unrecognizable because they were coding in assembly. It's totally different now.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Something I always find fascinating about this generation of consoles is that actually the technical limitations created something absolutely fantastic. And because the distance and the draw distance had to obviously affect the quality of the image, it made it actually look further away. So those long jumps that you do, especially in like Castle Town, which it feels like it's across the entire map, it actually amplifies it because it feels so much further because you can't see the finer details. I mean, let alone the fact it's actually groundbreaking. It's absolutely groundbreaking and is now done by so many companies in every facet you can think of now. It's similar to Tomb Raider 2, where for the draw distance, instead of just having kind of blank openness, they'd cover everything in shadow, which made a really creepy, sort of kind of tense feeling because you wouldn't know what's popping out in front of you. Having replayed some of these games with the fidelity upped and that taken away, it doesn't have the same charm or fear in certain aspects. And in Spyro, it's definitely charm. To see something from so far away and watch it slowly come into like quality and vision, absolutely incredible. Especially when you consider how early this is in 3D gaming.
Seriously, it's nuts what they were able to. And you're right. Another trick they would use besides the darkness thing, it would just be fog. Like that's what they did in Silent Hill.
Yes,
It was just fog to shroud the loading zones. This was the first game that actually kind of let you see everything, even when it was off in the distance, which was just beyond impressive for the time.
And of course, we are spoiled by the fact that everything's in HD now. Playing this back with, the old AC cables and all that jazz, you wouldn't notice so many things like that as clearly. So, say how the background may look just like a kind of like two oblong shapes that maybe resemble a castle. Through the blur of a CRT TV, it actually looked very realistic.
I also think, though, it makes sense because if you are thinking about looking at something from a far distance, it's not going to be as clear as it would be right up front to you. So having that rendering trick is also somewhat realistic to an extent, or it kind of. I actually feel like it kind of immerses things because it's like, well, yeah, no wonder I can't see it. It's so far away.
Yeah.
So I never really had an issue with. I played my game on a PS3, and so there's no upscaling. It's just showing it without the CRT blur, and it still looked good. It still looked nice. I did have to add like a little bit of manual what was it? I think there was like scaling that you could do. I forget what the actual term is. Like you can do some like smoothing. You could do texture smoothing on it, which does make it look a little bit nicer, but it still looked good even on the non-smooth version of it.
Yeah, and something as well, something they did which I thought was genius. Sometimes places might just look like the background, but if there were gems there, instead of trying to edit in a low quality gem, they'd make it disappear, but they'd keep the glint because the gems have kind of a JPEG that glints every now and then off them. Mm-hmm. So you might see a glint in the distance, and it would just catch your eye, and it just leads you to explore on a little bit. So not only were they aware of what they were doing on a technical standpoint, they also knew how to make it, easy for the gamer to actually think, oh, I should try and get over there, as opposed to just doing a leap of faith and crashing into an invisible wall.
The level design in this game is so freaking good. You talking about that made me think of it. The level design is so well done. It has to be so intentional, like the way everything works. You never feel like, how do I make this jump? You almost the times that are tough jumps, you feel like, oh yeah, I know I can make this. I just have to figure out the right height to start gliding at, or I have to find the right place to jump off at. I think what you said sums it up perfectly. By seeing the glints of the gems, it encourages you to explore the level even more, because then you go, ooh, what's out there? There were a couple spots where, when I played the game back in the spring earlier, I 100%ed it. I found every dragon, got every single gem. I did the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, I do think some of them are kind of. There's a couple of the dragons to get where I'm like, I don't understand how you were supposed to figure some of this out. Specifically on the later levels, there's like it's a really fun and satisfying thing. But when you get the supercharge or the supercharge or whatever it is, you're supposed to use the supercharge to jump off a ramp, which would then obviously you're going crazy fast. So then when you start gliding like that, you're just like flying. It's wild to see. And there's one of them, you have to kind of stay on this track, and you have to it's weird looping thing where you have to start at one end of the level and go to the other end entirely on this boost track, and it's super difficult to do, and some of the jumps don't make any sense with how you're supposed to make them. It's like there was a couple times where you'd have to take a leap of faith and be like, all right, I hope I can see where they want me to land, which I wasn't a fan of, but that was very few and far between. So I can't really be mad too much at the level design, because 9 times out of 10, when you were supposed to do a big jump or you were supposed to find a specific area, the game was very clear, or I shouldn't say very clear, but it directed you very well into where you needed to go and how to find different things.
Well, that's the thing, and what you're talking about reminds me of Treetops, where there's a specific combinations of jumps that you have to do, which are not at all hinted, and it's very, it's unrealistic to think of how you should make the sharp jump to the right, quick jump to the left, hold on to the track, and then do that one final jump, which if you do well, you only just make. But the thing of it with
Mhm.
all of it is just when you consider this entire aspect of everything, we're still in that period of video games where there were those kind of unfair bullshit moments in video games. The amount of times I've played like games from the Mega Drive, is it the Mega Drive in the US or Mega Drive in the UK?
It's
Genesis.
the Mega Drive in the UK, it's
That's it.
Genesis in the US.
Yeah, there's quite a few games I've played on that where there's this completely insane way to get past something that you'd never know, never ever know. And I think there's
Mhm.
still a bit of a hangover of that with this video game. Obviously, it's meant to be more child friendly, bring that audience to the PlayStation. But I think there were some elements of video game developers who back in the day were just really cruel. And Spyro 1 still has some of this. Spyro 2 and 3 don't, they have the difficult moments, but they don't have something that is almost inconceivable to figure out unless you have a tip guide.
Yeah, I mean, it's a symptom of the times, like you said. It was also back then when people were kind of stuck with their games, so they would have like, well, I have nothing else to play, so I got to figure this out. But
Mm,
it still didn't necessarily always make it fun. I think in general, this game felt very fair. I never really felt like there was too many moments. There was a couple moments where would have to look up a guide, and sometimes I'll look up a guide to figure out where to go next, and then be like, ah, damn it, I should have been able to figure that out.
mm,
This one, I don't really remember many moments where I was like, oh, I should have been able to figure that out. I think specifically in Treetops, like you said, that level was very unwieldy trying to figure that out. Though I will say it would have been a lot harder to figure it out if it wasn't for the fact that Spyro controls so damn well.
mm.
Spyro feels so good to control, even to this day. And I'm saying that with someone who does not have nostalgia for the game, who is not used to these controls. I booted it up before we recorded tonight just to get a refresher again, and it still felt good to play. And part of that is because the camera controls received input from an actual NASA engineer named Matt Whitting, and he worked at helping them figure out how to control Spyro during flight to make it feel better for playtesters. Because originally, some of the testers were talking about feeling nauseous because the camera was going all over the place. So Matt Whitting helped them design the controls in a way that didn't make players feel nauseous or uncomfortable. And honestly, it shows because Spyro controls really goddamn well.
I think the thing it's got on its benefit as well. Yes, there's a few different moves, but there's not too many, and it's so easy to just become like fluent, for want of a better phrase, in controlling
Mhm.
Spyro. Of course, there's certain like combinations you can do where if you flame then charge, you can actually kind of do a flame charge almost in the way because the flame follows you for a little bit. Or if when you do a jump, you can charge at just a certain point to go a little bit further if you don't want to do an entire glide, or to just speed on to the next platform. But it's entirely comfortable to do. And there's very few times in Spyro games where if you lose a life, you're blaming the controls. And I find that's
Yes.
consistent throughout the game series. They do introduce the hover at the end of in Spyro 2, where he gets just a little bit of a height burst at the end of a glide. That's the only thing this game is missing. Oh, there is also the roll, which has never served any purpose whatsoever, but I appreciate that it's there.
And all the I think the parts I like most about how it controls is just that the move set is so simple. They don't overcomplicate the amount of things Spyro can do, which a lot of modern games tend to do.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I like the complications to an extent if it's well designed. Like I love Horizon Zero Dawn. There's a lot of different things you can do as Aloy in that game. But what I kind of miss about this era of game design is where your characters are given a very limited move set, and because of the limitations of the move set given, the game designers have to work a little bit harder at the level design, trying to make things unique and interesting. So it's not just the same thing over and over again. I think that's also the genius of Mario, where the Mario verb set is relatively the same in every game. It's run and jump, and then you get a couple power ups here and there.
Mhm.
But they take those power ups and they don't really add a whole lot to them throughout the game. You'll get more as the game goes on, but in general, they just try to find new ways for you to play with them. But all the levels have to be able to be beaten without those power ups for the most part, unless they give you an easy way to obtain that power up consistently and every time, type of thing.
Yeah.
Or they give you an easy way to obtain that power up consistently. And in
Mm.
Spyro, there's it's the same thing. There's where you need the super boosts or super jumps, there are the boost tracks. But other than that, there's not really a whole lot. It's just they pick your verb set of just glide, fire, and charge, and they design all of the levels around that. And I don't think you can I think this what this game nails is the fact that it feels good to control Spyro. You know, like there's that a story of when Mario 64 was being designed, Miyamoto spent forever just trying to put the fine touches on Mario's movement to make it feel good and fun to move.
Hmm.
And you can tell that same level of detail, or at least a similar level of detail, was put into Spyro's controls.
And that's the thing I told you yesterday. I spent about a year. I love the Reignited trilogy so much, and I love the first game so much. I just started trying to do it as quickly as possible, and this eventually led into kind of a speedrunning campaign, for want of a better phrase, over the course of a year. And my best time was 48 minutes and 57 seconds for a any percent completion, no glitch. Which at the time when it came out was, I think after a year or so, was about 50th best in the world. And I actually had it on one of the websites, but they've since shut down, and I've not been asked to try and upload it to another one because you need to prove it in so many different ways. But the reason it
Yep.
was so easy to slip into, starting to speedrun this game is because it's just so simple to control. There's no sort of like glitchy things you need to do by certain button combinations. There's obviously like, certain like bits you can take advantage of. But because it is basically just sprint, well, I say sprint, charge, flame, or jump and glide, it gives you such a platform to just start trying to do this as quickly as possible. And it was some of the best fun I've had in gaming. I mean, I spent, like, it'd be about 3 hours a night I'd spend doing 2 or 3 runs. And it was just so much fun. I had it down to a T, and every time something went wrong on, like, obviously with a speedrun, if something goes wrong, that's pretty much it. I never found myself blaming the controls. It was me for jumping too early, or for turning left too quickly, or for missing that gem in ice caverns or something like that. And I think the reason it
Yeah.
was so good is just because the controls are so easy to become at one with. Like, you don't find yourself looking at the controller. You don't find yourself thinking, "Oh, what button do I have to press here? What combination do I have to do?" It's like plug in and play, essentially.
Yeah, and I think it's a credit to the level design in that aspect where one of the reasons I think you were talking before when you were speed running it, you play the glitchless category, and I
Hmm.
think that's a testament to the level design where there are so many moments when you're playing through a level where you will be exploring the world, exploring that specific level, and you will be able to tinker with where you can jump and like kind of corners you can skip. And that's one of the most satisfying things in games, I feel like. And I feel like it's a little bit underrated where you see what the intended path is. You see what the game designers wanted you to do and how they wanted you to do it. But then you can also see like, well, I bet you I could cut this corner just a little bit quicker and completely skip over this section if I time this jump just right. Or
Absolutely.
I can jump around a corner that they weren't expecting me to and maybe find like a part of the geography that you are able to stand on, but maybe it wasn't the intended spot for you to stand on it. And that's how you're able to skip a different area.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is such a satisfying moment for a player when you feel like you've kind of cheesed the game design a little bit. Like you know what the designers wanted, but you figured out a way around it. And that makes you feel smart. That's a very good and satisfying feeling.
And it works in two ways as well. Like there's places like Alpine Ridge where if you get a certain combination of jumps on the islands, you can really save time, and you can just make one jump. That they I don't know if I'm probably sure they knew that you should take 2 jumps instead of 1 to complete it. But there's just those moments where you can risk it and push it, and if you get it right, it's perfect. But there was also some game designs like. Granted, we'll talk about the bosses in this game, which I think are particularly weak. But right at the end of the game with Nasty Nork, which of course is at the end of the run, when the platforms are going in, being able to sprint, being able to charge and jump, and not letting go of charge at any point, so you could basically just hop above the steps to get up there as quickly as possible. So satisfying. It is unbelievably good.
And in speaking of the levels, most of the levels are the exploratory things that we've been talking about, but there are also levels that are essentially kind of like timed flying missions
I love them
where
so much.
I do too, actually. They are such fun challenges where you have a specific amount of time. There's different objectives within each level. There's like multiple objectives that you have to get. And if you want to 100% the game, you need to complete all the objectives. What are the rewards for completing each objective? I forget what they are. Are they
It's
crystals or something like?
it's gems.
It's gems.
So that's the thing I
That's what
love.
it is.
That's the thing I love about it, because I've introduced this game and done playthrough with this game with so many people, like previous acquaintances, people I've been sharing houses with, all this sort of stuff. And the thing I love about the flying challenges, they can be really difficult to pick up. But even if you only get a few things, you still get a gem reward. So even if you can't complete the entire level, you're still leaving with like 140 gems or so. And that's really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate that. Obviously, going through all of it, you get the maximum reward. But if there's something you just can't quite do, you don't feel bad for leaving the level like 3/4 complete, because you're still getting a hefty reward for it. And I think that's fantastic game design in itself, just to give this new challenge, but not make it compulsory to complete.
Yes. And the challenges, when you say challenge, it is a challenge. Like, it really tests a lot of your skills in terms of how well you can execute them quickly and efficiently. And it's very fun, especially the flying stuff, man. Like, the flying stuff is so fun, in my opinion. Like, I really enjoy some of the flying missions. It was frustrating. Like, if you watch my streams, they were definitely the ones that I got the most angry and aggravated with, next to some of the frustrating parts of the bosses, which we'll get to. But it was also the levels I had the most fun with. I really enjoyed trying to figure out all the different mechanics that they were wanting you to do at different times, specifically just also even figuring out the order in which to complete all the different objectives, because one of the additional objectives, besides just like destroying these 5 things or destroying these 10 things, if you could do all of the previous objectives in one run, if you could do everything in one, you would also get more gems. And that was also really satisfying, because you had the puzzle of the individual challenges and then the puzzle of figuring out how to do all the individual challenges within one run and hope that you get it all done at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It was really satisfying when you were able to figure that out. I really enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing. It's one of the ones I also felt like I came back to a lot. Not just because speedrunning, trying to get a quicker time. It's just fun just to go through it and just see what you can do and see how you can shave those 10 seconds like here and there. That's a personal thing for me. I love doing that in all video games, let alone Spyro. But the fact that it's all kind of there for you and you just have to figure out the best path. That's what makes it so satisfying, when you finally get that moment and you realize, oh, I should have gone for the treasure chest before the rings, like making those connections and taking the risk itself. And of course, if you fail, it's only they only give you about 1 minute and 30 seconds to complete it anyway. So it's not as if you have to go back a huge deal to try it again.
Exactly. It's short risk, short reward. Or, it's a small risk type of thing, but it's a lot of fun still to figure it out as you go. And in kind of thinking of movement, or challenges that involve like quick movement and understanding the mechanics of Spyro, there's individual challenges within some of the levels, like chasing the dudes like wrapped up in like that whatever that robe that they're wearing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. The egg thieves.
Yep, the egg thieves. I hate them, but I also kind of enjoy the change up and challenge.
I know what you mean, and believe me, when I was going through this, that was where I made the biggest cock ups, because I think it's for Dream Crafters. I think sorry, Dream Weavers or Magic. No, it's Magic Crafters. And the balloonist there, you need 5 dragon eggs. And of course, at that point in the game, there's only been a few. And the one at the beginning of Magic Crafters, you have to be perfect to get, otherwise he jumps up that kind of ledge on the right-hand side and you can't get him. Or it's the one in Town Square, which that was the one that was the bane of my existence when like running this game as quickly as possible, because if you miss that guy, that's it.
With the egg stealers, I think what irked me the most was the fact that there were some that would make you chase after them in a super small area. So you'd either have to figure out how to head them off at the pass or like find the shortcuts to get to them quickly, which could be difficult depending on how small the area was and where the small area was located. There's one, I forget the level, but it's like on a cliffside and the center of it is with water. Like there's a pool in the middle of it. So you're just chasing him around in a circle. So if you fall off the cliff, you don't actually die. You just go down to a lower level, but that means you have to climb all the way back up. So it's just this really annoying section with this egg thief or whatever. And I couldn't stand it. And they not to get into the bosses just yet, but the egg thieves have a major part in Nasty Nork.
Yes.
Which is one of my least favorite. I don't like Nasty Nork's boss fight. I don't think it's a good final boss fight in the slightest. I would almost argue that out of all the bosses, maybe I'm kind of sifting through them all right now. Um, maybe the third one, which was like this weird goblin looking gremlin thing, was probably the closest to a boss that tested the mechanics the game teaches you, but we'll
Oh,
get to the bosses in a moment.
the guy with the most ridiculous name in the game, Blowhard.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of apt with that face. That thing's terrifying. He's got a giant mouth, just creepy as hell. Something I wanted to bring up, and I forgot to bring up when we were talking about the mechanics, the way the game's HUD is displayed, and by that I mean the lack thereof. It is a really intelligent design to show to show Spyro's health with his friend the Dragonfly Sparks, if I remember the name correctly, is his name, right?
Yep,
Sparks.
Sparks. With an X.
With an X, because it's the '90s, man. It was fucking cool and shit. X Games and Tony Hawk, so we call him Sparks.
Sparks is cool, bro.
Brokes, I don't know. Bro with an X. Thank you. Thank you for the pity laugh. I'll take it. But with I love that Sparks was your HUD essentially. Like, you didn't need to have a health meter or see how many hearts you had or anything like that. You would just know your health based off what was available for Sparks. Though, what is it? I think the way that you get health back is by Sparks eating sheep, right?
If you basically kill an animal that's not a threat, it releases a butterfly, which Sparks then eats.
That's what it is. Thank you.
Yeah, and sometimes I think in the first game they just had regular ones, but every now and in the first game it was just ones that helped your health, but in the second and third, every now and then you get a blue one, which would fill it up completely and give you an extra life.
Oh, okay, that's a cool little twist to it.
Fun fact.
But it makes sense now why. I mean, that explains why Spyro had all those enemies, those sheep enemies that we hear about in the commercials. There, everyone all those sheep just hated Spyro.
I had a selection of candles that they released during the Reignited trilogy, and one which I loved was Toasty Pumpkin because that smelled amazing. One was Burnt Sheep, and that was a purchase that was lit once and then kept to the side to look nice.
Are you serious? They sold burnt sheep scented candles?
Yep, they had the Spyro marketing for the Reignited trilogy was really insane. And yeah, you could get, it was the burnt sheep candle, it was Toasty Pumpkin, and I think those were the only two. But the burnt sheep one, it was this like black charcoal colored candle. And it was dire. Like, the pumpkin one I got first, and I was like, this is really nice. This is, I bought like 3 or 4 because I just enjoyed the smell. And I bought the burnt sheep one, like, oh, funny name. I bet it's going to be like a nice sort of, kind of a like grassy flavor. No, it just smelled like an ashtray.
What you know what? Gotta commend them for committing to the bit. They it's like, you want burnt sheep, you're gonna get burnt sheep, baby.
Well, that's the thing at the time as well. When the Reignited trilogy came out, it's reignited my love for Spyro. And I went through so much of the merchandise. Like, I got the Spyro game controller holder. I got like Spyro merch. I got a Spyro Christmas jumper somewhere. I got Spyro mugs. I went ham for that.
I kind of want you, for when this episode drops and for your post, to wear the Spyro jumper.
If I can find it, I will. I'm not sure if I brought it over to the States.
Well, if too bad. Who knows? Maybe someone can ship it over. It's not going to be out till November.
We got time. You should
don't do that. I don't want anyone on your side paying for shipping for a fucking Spyro jumper just so you can wear it for an Instagram.
You should see it though. There were some nice tasteful ones where it's just a pattern. My one was just a big ass Spyro face on the front and then his tail on the back and gems on the wrists, on the arms. Sorry, not the wrists.
I was not expecting the descriptor of tasteful Spyro jumper to be a thing.
There are some. I didn't have one.
This is wild. I had no idea. I'll be honest, man. I had no idea that you were this big of a Spyro fan. Like, I like you said you were. That's why I'm having you on. But like, hearing all this, I'm even more happy now to have you on the episode.
It's the thing. I'm a Nintendo fanboy, but I didn't. I basically got given. I got like was basically they lent us to Nintendo for 2 weeks, and all those games, Mario 64, Bowser, Banjo and Kazooie, all those platformers are like my diehard favorites. Actually they're diehard favorites in a big list. But during that time, we then got a PlayStation, and those were my childhood games: Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, all of those types. Those were the games I played the most, and they're arguably the games I've had the most experience and most of my youth with. I didn't get another Nintendo system until I bought the Wii. So all the stuff like Spyro, that's childhood me. My childhood me was PlayStation 1 for 5 years, then the PlayStation 2. Nintendo didn't resurface until much later in my in my gaming journey. But yeah, so all of this stuff is much more childhood to me than maybe other things. Like when we talked about Mario Galaxy, I played that as somebody who was kind of aware of video games from a critical level. Spyro was my get up every morning at 7 o'clock and play video games game.
Man, I'm trying to think now what my get up at 7 o'clock play video games game was. I guess it was Jack and Daxter because I on the PS2. Or and actually, you know what? No, Donkey Kong 64 for the N64. I played that game to death. But yeah. So sorry to bring it back to Spyro. What we were talking about was the the burnt sheep, and how when your Sparks eats a butterfly, that's when you get a little bit of health back, and you can tell Spyro's health, what level Spyro's health is at, by Sparks's color.
Yes.
And and as I believe it goes, like it's like what, green or blue when he's healthy, and as he gets more and more damage, it gets like yellow and then red, and then he's dead.
It's gold,
or something like that.
It's gold when he's 3 hits, blue when he's got 2. Actually no, gold he's got 4 hits left, blue he's got 3, 2 he's got. So basically, it's gold, blue, green, and then when you got nothing, it's 1 hit and you're out. And Sparks in the game also helps pick up gems. So not only is he useful for your health, but without him, it's harder to pick up gems that are around you.
So, and I love that they use him as more than just your HUD too. Like, it's a really smart design. It doesn't take too much away. It kind of adds to the immersion a little bit, which is really cool.
It's a great deal of information in one, when one snapshot that you see. Like, you can tell exactly what level you're at. You don't need a number at the top. You don't need the pretty confusing Super Mario 64 pie pieces or anything like that, which somehow refill when you're like standing on top of water. I don't know. But it's just one of those things. There's so many bits in it. I think the Spyro games were perfected and were better later on. But to see how they started this, they started so strong. Like, it's an unbelievable effort, and so many parts of it are so good. And it's the little bits like that. It's just those little touches that Insomniac made while they had those 3 games of Spyro that were absolute gold.
Its popularity is evident. I feel like, this design obviously contributed to it, but this game was popular even outside of its targeted demographic of kids. There was I saw the gaming historian's video where he was reading about, or he read a quote from one of the developers at Insomniac who were saying they were getting letters from grandmothers who bought this game for their grandkids and ended up taking it anyway and playing it.
Yeah,
because they liked Spyro. And I think Spyro, it's a credit to its controls, it's a credit to the design, where it doesn't feel like, when you look at it, it's clearly a video game, but you know how like certain things where you like look at World of Warcraft. I love World of Warcraft, but when you look at that, it's nothing but HUD. There are so much information thrown at you where if you don't know what's going on, it would be overwhelming to anyone just viewing it for the first time. Versus Spyro, you don't need to see anything. You don't need to understand what's happening. All you can see is Spyro can run and jump, and when he takes a hit, your dragonfly changes color. That's it. And you get all the information you need from, like you said, one source, and that makes it so much more easy for new people and less experienced gamers to just pick up and play.
And what's amazing, it's a source that your eye is already looking at because Sparks is floating around you. You don't need to look up to the top left of the screen to see a Mario face and how many lives he's got left. You're just looking dead on the entire time, and it's constant information.
I didn't even think about it. Yeah, you're right. It's right there for you. You don't have to look away. Even if you're not looking at Sparks, you can see the color out of the corner of your eye.
Yeah.
And it just makes it a lot easier for you to know exactly what you have going on.
That being said, I do have one complaint about Sparks.
Go for it.
I hate the shade of blue he is in Spyro 1. In Spyro 2 and 3, it's a much deeper blue. In Spyro 1, it's a baby blue, and for some reason, it bothers me. And as a kid, it bothered me so much that if I was on blue, I'd either take a hit and go to green, or immediately find a butterfly and make it back up to gold. I really hate baby blue, okay?
I don't know what to make of that, except, God damn it, Chris, I got the perfect transition. And speaking of colors, the the art director for the game, Craig Stitt, designed each world, around 3 base colors, and that way it was able to give each world its own distinct visual look, and he wouldn't repeat the colors. Obviously, you might repeat some colors, but not all 3 in every level. So I mean, obviously there was more than those 3 colors in each level, but he used them as the ground point, as the base of all color design for each of the 3 levels, which honestly I think he did very effectively, because every home world feels very visually distinct to the rest.
I mean, that's the thing. There's certain parts in the game I find especially that it feels like there's more of a nighttime aesthetic as the game goes on. Like pretty much most of the worlds at the beginning in the Artisans, it's nice, it's bright, it's during the day. Toasty, who is the boss, is the only one where it gets slightly darker, with like kind of a sunset setting. And then it kind of fluctuates through the game, and it really gives you a feeling that you're going through a journey that's longer than the amount of hours you're playing it for. And I love that. I don't know if it was intentional. And especially when you get to like Twilight Harbor in Nasty's world, like that is like the sunset of the game per se. But at that point, we've already gone through a darkness and then a light shift again. By the time you get to Beastmakers, it's dark, it's nighttime. We go back into the morning in Dreamweavers with many of the levels there. And then it goes back to kind of a nighttime aesthetic again. So I get the feeling like it makes you feel like it's a journey that's happening over a longer period of time. And I love that. And also the amount of times as a kid, I just stop the game and just look at the kind of what's it called? The kind of the globe circle around the outside of the game.
Yeah.
I'd spend just hours looking at that, because it was just, there'd be these gorgeous, contrasting, conflicting colors, and it'd be either a really comfortable sight, a really melancholic sight in some cases, or even just a one where the color combinations you weren't necessarily expecting, and it's just cool to see. The aesthetic design in this is, at the time, bar none. I know Mario 64 was kind of it's kind of the one that everyone wanted to be. It's kind of the focus. Everyone wanted to try that. I think when it comes to level uniqueness, Spyro has the one up. Like Mario 64 is phenomenal. It's one of the most important games ever. But this was different. And obviously 3 years later, there's going to be 2 years later, there's going to be some changes. But Mario 64 does get a bit repetitive. I never felt any levels were repetitive in Spyro.
I don't know if I quite agree with Spyro having the one up on Mario 64 in terms of uniqueness of levels, but I totally understand I totally see where you're coming from with you just enjoy Spyro's levels more. I shouldn't say more, but you don't feel like they drag as much as Mario 64 does towards the end with some of them.
And actually, taking your comment, there's also uniqueness in a different way. I see what you mean, because Mario is such a Mario 64, such a Mario experience. The Spyro is a different, it's kind of different. I see what you mean. You make a very good point. So I somewhat rescind my comment, but not fully.
Well, I think like Mario 64, its levels are so vastly different in terms of the mechanics that they throw at you. I should say like each of the platforming challenges feels very different on each world or in each painting in Mario 64 versus Spyro. I don't feel like the platforming challenges are all that completely unique, but I think they're not all that different, but they're always switched up just enough to feel new and fresh.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I'm talking more the aesthetic. So I think you're right in what you say.
Okay.
Like the aesthetic of Spyro levels, I feel like is better than the aesthetic. It's like the aesthetic of, let's say, oh god, I don't know, Jolly Roger's Lagoon in Mario 64. Great aesthetic, but we kind of see it again with Dire Docks. It kind of comes up again later, and the same colors base and that sort of stuff. With Spyro, every single world has a kind of unique aesthetic. There's some which are similar, but like the first world, Stone Hill, you never really see that color palette again. And it's like you were saying about the fact there's 3 different colors for each level. So I'm going for the aesthetic. When you come to actually gameplay challenges, you're right. Mario 64 is definitely more unique, especially when you consider that there's pole jumping at certain points. There's flying carpet rides, all that
Mhm.
jazz.
Well, and definitely one of the things that this game took from Mario 64 is the hub worlds. Like Mario 64, Peach's Castle is the hub for everything. In this, they have different hub worlds, and what they kind of did, like you saw in Mario 64, is that the hub world has its own little hidden secrets and challenges,
Mhm.
and different like dragons you can rescue and gems you can obtain. Um, I will say I didn't necessarily always enjoy that in some of the hub worlds. I actually found the hub worlds a little lackluster. I didn't necessarily enjoy having to traverse them all that much. I'm trying to think. I think the second one specifically, where I think you're in like that kind of desert canyon, you know what I'm talking
Oh,
about?
Peacekeepers, yeah.
Peacekeepers, yeah, I did not really enjoy that one all that much. It was fine. I thought it was a little interesting. I almost feel like there's a little bit of world storytelling in these because there's a battle going on, and
Hmm.
right? Am I
Yeah.
remembering the right thing?
Yes,
And
yeah.
like you can shoot cannons and crap like that, and it was interesting to say the least. But it wasn't my favorite to necessarily play through, but it was still cool. I liked the world building that they did in that, where you felt like the different creatures are shooting at each other. Like you felt like maybe there's some kind of history amongst these creatures that you end up having to take out because they're shooting cannons
Yeah,
at things.
especially with Dreamweavers, where the enemies start like messing around with each other. Like some enemies electrocute the Norks at some points, kind of just like in a
Mhm.
petty squabble. I always felt the hub worlds, were actually basically a diluted level in themselves because, of course, you had the same objectives that would come to the overall collectathon example. I do find while I enjoy the fact it's kind of a diluted level to get you used to maybe some of the challenges or things that may be happening later in the levels, it wasn't as charming as something as like Peach's Castle.
100%, because Peach's Castle feels like a lived-in place, surprisingly enough,
And
versus
one
this was just kind of like you're traveling, and because of the way you travel via hot air balloon, even though
Mhm.
Spyro can fly. To
Hey, Sonic isn't a kart racing game. There's no logic here.
That's true. That's true. uh,
I-
but I don't know. The hub worlds were never my favorite. Specifically, like we mentioned before, the oh my gosh, sorry, the Peacekeepers area. And if I'm trying to remember what it was, it might have been the Beastmakers, where it was like I don't remember what Beastmakers look like. I can't remember. It might have been
Swampy and Electrocuty.
that might have been it. I'm trying to remember, but it was not my favorite. And speaking of favorites and least favorites, so what were some of your favorite levels?
There's one rant that's going to happen, and I feel like it may need to happen now if that's okay with you.
Go off. Go off.
So one of the most amazing things about Spyro, one of the things that made it seem like such a professional game, was the music by Stuart Copeland, who was the drummer for the Police.
Yep.
After his tenure with the Police ended, he went into kind of soundtracks, and he did soundtracks for The Equalizer. He had a whole load of films under his belt, and he was approached to do the first game, and he took it. And they even set him up with a version of Spyro where Spyro was invincible, so he could explore without danger and get a vibe for what the music would be. And every single track he created specifically for the world he played through, which, first of all, I find an incredible testament to how seriously he took his work. But also, I
Hmm.
think Stuart Copeland is responsible for some of the best video game music of all time. And there's so many levels in this game which are enhanced by the music. Twilight Harbor, for example, is a very standard factory level, and it seems kind of dim and kind of dark, but there's this kind of somewhat uplifting feeling to the music because it's right at the end of the game. And that makes it stand out. And so many of the levels that stand out to me are because the music is phenomenal. If I had to go through some of my favorites, Dark Hollow in World 1, kind of the library, grassy, aesthetic, nighttime, that sort of stuff. It was a wonderful, cozy theme, and the music makes it stand out for me. Ice Cavern in the Peacekeeper's Home, a kind of mildly scary sounding atmospheric music that almost makes you feel cold. That's a favorite. Magic Crafters, when you get to Crystal Flight and the music's now going faster slightly and has slightly more impact because these challenges are getting more difficult. That's a favorite. Treetops, which has this amazing jungle sound behind all of it in Beastmakers. That's one of my favorites. All of my favorites are linked like inextricably to the music. When you first go to Toasty and you have this epic piece of music building up and swelling, and it's not a particularly fast piece of music, it's just this crescendo into what is meant to be an epic moment. It stands out so massively. Lofty Castle, Dark Passage, Nork Cove. One level, Jacques, the boss level of Dreamweavers, he actually used that piece of music on one of his retrospective albums. He actually took that song,
Oh,
renamed it Rain, and published that as one of his own works because he was so proud of that piece of music. And so much of what I enjoy from this game is the multisensory experience, and a big part of that is Stuart Copeland's amazing music. It sets the scene, it provides an amazing idea to the aesthetic that's going on that's already presented visually. And my favorite levels, the ones I play the most, are the ones where the music is the best. I think it just means that all of the levels are a very consistent standing. They're a very consistent like group of levels all together. But the ones that stand out are the ones where the music takes me to that world. And those will always be my favorites. I listen to the Spyro soundtrack on a near daily basis. They released it on Spotify, both the Reignited and the original trilogy. Stuart Copeland released the original trilogy music. And it's just phenomenal. And to think at this point they are hiring professional musicians to soundtrack their games was such a step ahead of many things we'd seen at the time. At this point, music was taking a big step in video games. Like at this point, iconic songs, Dire Dogs from Mario 64, the Legend of Zelda theme in Ocarina of Time, the music behind that was coming into itself. This was the first game where the music didn't feel like video game music. This was the first time where it felt like an actual professional piece of music that could be for maybe something else. And in the case of Jacques, did become something else. It became an album track. And I've always said, and I've even said this as a kid, and my dad's been fascinated by it. I've always said video game music has to be good because you're going to hear it so much. If you start to get bored of it,
yes.
you're going to get bored of the level. And this amazing thing where if you get the video game music right, it actually helps you focus. When I'm doing work, when I'm doing my lesson planning for my job, when I was doing my dissertation back at university, when I was doing exams back in secondary school, I would always put on 3 soundtracks that would help me focus because when I was listening to this music the first time, subconsciously I was focusing on the game, so therefore subconsciously it helped me focus on my work. And Spyro is always up there. Of my top 3 soundtracks, it would be very, very difficult to put Spyro any lower than 2.
Oh wow. Okay. Well,
I told you I'd rant this episode.
no, I'm very happy you said all that because I don't like the soundtrack.
What? Are you?
It's not.
What?
No. So here's what I'm going to say.
This had better be a damn good explanation.
It's fine. It's not bad. Just to be clear, when I say I don't like it, I should just say here's a better way. It's not memorable to me. I can't think of a single melody from it. I can't hum it, which I think is fine. I think that means it's well designed for the game. Like I agree with you that it's really good music for this game. I can't ever imagine listening to it outside of this game because to me it's just lounge jazz, which is a bit of a it's fine, and I'm not trying to say like I'm not a music critic. I'm not even saying I have good taste in music. I'm not even saying all this to like to save face or like avoid any type of criticism because I know this soundtrack is generally universally praised. But when I played it, it was just there. Like it didn't stand out to me at all. Like it was really good. Like I don't know how to describe it where I'm like I'm listening to this I'm like this is really well this is nice. Like I like the music for this. But never once did I like listen to it and was like this is like something I would want to that would get stuck in my head. If anything, I feel like I just hear generic lounge music in my head. And that's why I think the reason I came on so strong as saying like I don't like it is because all I would hear for years is how great the soundtrack is and Stuart Copeland, the Police. And then I would listen to it and I listened to it. I'm like, it's just nothing it's just nothing special to me.
That's fascinating.
And I think that's really where it kills it for me is that it's fine. It just, I don't know. It just doesn't do anything for me. And it bums me out because it's very clear that they put a lot of effort into it. They got Stuart Copeland from the Police to do the soundtrack for this. I I do kind of disagree with your assessment that game music was coming into its own. I would argue it was there since at least Super Mario Brothers.
Oh,
Um,
just to
with that,
counter that point, it was there and it was unique. However, the 8-bit and the 16-bit generation, it wouldn't be music that would be appreciated by anybody other than the gamer.
that's fair. I. Hmm, I disagree only because if you're going by based off of how it was presented in the games, yes, because not everyone likes those tones or those sounds. But have you ever heard like the Final Fantasy theme that you heard from the original Final Fantasy fully orchestrated?
Mm-hmm.
It's
That's thing.
gorgeous.
That's when the music's fully orchestrated. When it's the original version,
But that's still the music. You know what I'm saying? Like the music underneath it was always there. It's just the presentation. I agree with you that people outside of gamers would not enjoy the presentation of old music,
mm-hmm.
of old game music, but the old game music itself, underneath the tones that maybe people didn't like, it was still music that people can enjoy outside of the game or outside of gamers. It just might have to be presented in a different way.
But the issue is
Um,
also if you present it in a different way, you're also able to add more elements. When you orchestrate a piece of music, you have so many more different instruments that you can provide a deeper, greater, or even add sounds to. Best example being the Legend of Zelda theme, which iconic piece of music, one of the absolute standouts. If you take
yeah.
the original theme and then compare it to an orchestrated version like the 25th anniversary they did, although the base melody is the same, they're adding so many different more elements that sometimes you don't even know it's happening, and that improves it. So I think I appreciate your point, and you do make a very good point. The melody from video games that were classic video games like Super Mario Land, Muda Kingdom, one of my favorite melodies. It is a good piece of melody by itself, but it is enhanced and becomes better when you can add more instruments to it. At the time, they didn't have that ability. Like Mario Galaxy, which you've heard me rant about, and I promise I won't get
Oh yeah,
emotional this
one of the
time.
best soundtracks. I'm in complete agreement with you on that one.
Exactly. If you took Good Egg Galaxy and you put it in an 8-bit mode, you'd have to take away instruments, you'd have to take away sequences, you'd have to take away whole different parts of an orchestra, and that would affect it. But that wasn't the original piece of music. When the original piece of music is something that you can build upon, you are going to change the overall effect. I agree, the bass melody is there, and sometimes the bass melody can be a beautiful piece of music, but it's actually the bits that's added to it later on can emphasize it and amplify it, for want of a music joke.
Well, I understand what you're saying and how like yes they took it and added stuff to it and that's what someone would enjoy now, but my argument is that the original game still had music that people could enjoy. It's just they didn't know how to enjoy it yet. But to your point specifically with this, yes, this is still a step forward regardless of the our disagreement on when game music is palatable to non-gamers. Well, actually, you know what? I think we both kind of agree. I think my argument was I think the original music is palatable, but has to be presented in a different way. If presented in the way that everyone would have heard it in 1985 or 88, then yeah, I though actually bizarrely enough in Japan there was full orchestrations of like Dragon Quest music in like 1989.
Oh,
Like they would have a
fantastic.
full symphony orchestra performing. Yeah, it's one of the earliest versions of game music being performed in a concert setting. But anyway, this isn't the video game music podcast.
Oh, please invite me on for that though.
God, I would. That would be a full. That would be a nuts conversation. I don't feel like I'm well versed enough. Like I'm not. I can't speak eloquently enough on like music. Like when listening to how you described everything, dude. Like I wish I was eloquent enough to describe how a song makes me feel. Like I know I was saying I'm not a big fan of the Spyro soundtrack, but I can't really pinpoint as to why. It just doesn't make me feel anything.
That's the
It
beautiful thing about music. I mean, I can tell you that in Spyro 3, there's 4 occasions where Stuart Copeland dips into an 8/6 beat without you even noticing. And obviously, with music validation, people can go, oh, yes, I agree, clap, 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 clap. But music at a base level, you don't need to have the knowledge to understand it. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. And that's kind of the beauty of it. If you don't think that a certain piece of music speaks to you personally, it doesn't have to. And that's just your opinion. And thankfully, opinions, unless they are offensive to other people or, aggressive.
well, actually, like actually problematic.
Exactly. Opinions can't be wrong. And if you don't like a piece of music, then that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to judge you or say anything against you
well,
badly for that.
to clarify with my point on this, I don't think the music's bad. If it's a weird combination of where it's like, this is perfect for this game, it just doesn't. I think it's like overhyped. The way people talk about the soundtrack, I feel like this was like some earth-shaking soundtrack but it was, when I listened to it, it was just, it served the game perfectly. And arguably, I think that's more of a credit to Stuart Copeland, because it is very hard, like you said before, Chris, to write game music, because you're going to listen to it for a long time on repeat over and over and over again. And with this game, I think the music was perfect for it. I think it fit each level perfectly. I think it complemented everything perfectly. It never wore out its welcome. It was always a like pleasant to listen to. The reason I was saying like I just don't understand the hype behind it is just because I can't tell you a single thing about it except it felt jazzy.
And that's
And I like jazz, but it feels generic to me.
You like
Generic isn't the right term. It just feels there.
I can understand that. I mean, I've also had the benefit of I grew up with this game and listened to these songs countlessly on repeat. So I know the songs inside and out. I mean, if you give me any level, I can whistle or hum the tune straight away. So of course, there's going to be some bias on my side. And obviously, I have a bit of music knowledge that I can kind of bring into it as well, which I can use eloquently to emphasize my point. Doesn't mean I'm right.
Well, I don't think I'm right either, because like I said, I'm clearly in the minority at the very least when most people I speak to who like this game rave about the soundtrack. So I think I'm definitely one of the few people who are, I shouldn't say dislike it. It just kind of, it's fine.
I think
it's there.
I think the word you're looking for, it's not like mediocre because that has a negative connotation. It's just, apt. It's just apt for the game that you played.
Yes, it doesn't blow me away. Like Mario Galaxy blew me away. I was not expecting to hear what I heard in that game. I also think one of my biases in terms of music in general is in terms of game music, is I like games with a strong melody, because a melody is what gets stuck in your head. I don't think that's always the most effective thing for a game. I think, like, for example, like think of any horror game. The soundtrack is arguably one of the most important things in a horror game. But 9 times out of 10, you're not going to remember the soundtrack from a horror game because it's meant to make you feel scared. It's not meant to make you remember, like memorize the song. I'm sure some people do, but it's meant to reinforce the gameplay. And I think the soundtrack for this and Spyro reinforces the gameplay, which is it's weird to say that I don't like the music, but I think it's perfect for the game, because that's what this does. It reinforces the gameplay, which in a sense is one of the highest compliments you can give game music.
I find as well, I have a certain affinity for games that almost provide the kind of like
an
ambiance. And that's what the sort of music is. So much so that in the Reignited trilogy, if you stand still for a while, the music actually takes away parts of the melodies to become calmer whilst the game's happening. And of course, because this is an exploration game, ambiance is better than possibly a harder hitting soundtrack that's, forcing something the entire time, when there's moments where you may just be exploring around corners looking for that last gem somewhere. I think that's where I kind of find the beauty in it. And the fact that even though it's ambiance music, each track to me is unique. And even if the bass melody is somewhat subdued, it's still there. I think that's what I enjoy from it. I listen to a lot of music while I'm working, and ambiance is always the best. So that may be why this ranks so highly with me. I think there's moments where a cinematic input is there. Like Toasty, like I mentioned earlier, the way that crescendos is absolutely phenomenal. Town Square in World 1, because you have to kind of build up to that level. That's when you have the trickiest challenges, and the music kind of reflects that in a way. So I feel like because Stuart Copeland obviously played through every level and wrote his songs accordingly, it's reflecting your progress in the game, which I find incredible.
I never thought of it that way. I mean, once again, music that reinforces the gameplay, which is, you can't give, in all honesty, in all seriousness, other than music that's phenomenal, you can't give a higher compliment. I think as much as I love music that's memorable, how many like there's so many games, especially older games, where like the soundtrack's amazing, but the game is shit to play. Um,
Croc.
this is not that. This is like, I think that it's more important for music to reinforce the gameplay than it is to stand out on its own. As much as I prefer the music that stands out on its own, that's because it's meant to, it stands out. So of course you're going to want to listen to it outside of the game.
Mm.
But when it reinforces the gameplay, that's when, and I mean, obviously the best of both worlds is for me is if you can have like a memorable, catchy melody or a hook that also reinforces the gameplay. And I think just a quick example of that is Journey for the PS3.
Mm.
That game has one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in my life. But anyway, we should talk about real quick before we start wrapping up the bosses. I feel like that's a good place to kind of end off on, or the lack thereof, the lack of interesting bosses, to say the least.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's very few things about this game I dislike. Obviously, this being the first in a trilogy, yes, it doesn't have the polish of later games, but you can kind of excuse it. Like many films I love watching, when you realize this is the birth of cliches and it's refined later, you still appreciate it being the beginning. And I have that with this game. The only thing I find that really sticks in my craw, well, there's actually two things that really stick in my craw. First of all, the fact there's no female dragons in the game, which I always found perplexing. That seems weird. But second of all, the boss battles. Toasty, the first boss being, a sheep in disguise. Ha! Funny. First boss, let's not make it difficult. Don't know why they put such an epic piece of music with it, but hey, it's a fun joke. And considering the credits say no sheep were harmed in the making of this game, I can kind of see what they're going for. Okay, so let's go to Dr. Shemp, World 2, Step Up. A basic jump over, fire his bum, and then he runs away, rinse and repeat. Okay, maybe we're stepping up a bit slower. Then we get Blowhard and Magic Crafters, and it's go up to him, flame him, he runs away, do it 3 times. And I'm like, it's a bit similar to the previous one, but it's okay, it'll be different next time. Metalhead in Beastmakers, you need to destroy the gates 3 times and flame him or charge him, and then he goes away. And then you go to Jacques, and you need to flame him, and he runs away 3 times. And then you go to Nork, and Nasty Nork, and you need to kill 3 enemies, and then he runs away. And it's just so depressing, because it's just cut and paste each time. Every boss gets hit, runs away 3 times. And considering how unique and how, amazing certain parts of this game was, how do they fall flat on the boss fights? There's not a single boss fight I think is good. And when you go into later games, Spyro 2, Spyro 3, they nail it. Some of them are absolutely fantastic. I mean, Ripto in the final boss is Spyro 2. Amazing boss fight. Here it is nothing noteworthy. Here is how I feel about your music opinions for Spyro. It serves a purpose, and that's it.
I mean, I would put the music as a step higher. That even in my own opinion, music serves much more of a purpose than the bosses.
I hope you realize you're going to be getting you're going to be getting messages from me saying, "Hey, just listen to this today. Tell me what you think. Just listen to it outside the game."
Honestly, I'll take it, man. You send me some of your favorite pieces. I will listen to them at work tomorrow. I'm dead serious.
Oh, I will absolutely do that. And listeners, just so you can join in too, the pieces I'm definitely going to send to my good friend Josh will be Toasty, which I've talked about a lot, Ice Cavern, Treetops, Lofty Castle, and Twilight Harbor.
Maybe when I hear the music outside of the gameplay, I might be able to focus more on it and hear what you hear and hear what you like about it.
Oh, I hope so.
Because it's one of those things where the music's good. It just, like I said, it just feel like all I can hear in my head is like a piano doing a little run. That's it, like something like that, and that's all I can hear. To me, I've heard that type of music thousands of times over, and I'm not enough of a jazz aficionado to be like, and I'm not even saying it's jazz, but in my mind, it's kind of like what I hear. I don't think it is technically jazz in the game, but I don't know. You know what? I'm not going to speak. I'm not a music expert. I know music well enough. I was in band in high school. I played an instrument, but I can't tell you any goddamn thing about music theory. But in any case,
would it help you if I told you what to listen for as well?
No. Well, you know what? How about this? Send it to me.
Mm-hmm.
I will listen to everything, tell you my thoughts, and then you tell me what to listen for. So I go in with like clean slate, no preconceived notions other than the fact that you like this song a lot. And then I will hear specific. Then I'll listen to it. I'll tell you what I think, and then I can hear then I can go back to it with what specifically you enjoy, like the specific moments that really resonate with you.
I like that.
Because I understand that. I understand that thought process. There's like songs I really like where there's specific sections that really hit me at an emotional level, and I can't necessarily explain why. Other than like like the melody or like the way a note is like played, something like that. But
Oh, and by the way, listeners, if you're hearing this, please, if you can, comment on the Instagram post or Twitter post that Still Loading will put out, because I'd love to hear your thoughts too. Absolutely would love to hear them. Anyway, Josh, sorry about that. Back to you.
No problem. I'm sure I'm going to be told how wrong I am, and that's okay.
Okay. Also, audience, no harassment. Josh is right. I am right. You are right. We're all right.
No, that's fine. People can tell me, as long as it's in a joking manner. I don't mind a little bit, as long as it's not mean. Don't be mean. I'm a sensitive boy.
Oh, Josh, you know I'm a teacher. I want 1,000 words on my desk by Monday.
Oh my god. Oh yes, sir. Anyway. But anyway, on back to the bosses. I'm with you on your feelings on them. They're fine. I think my biggest issue with the bosses in this are the fact that none of them really utilize the mechanics that the game uses the most, and it doesn't really test you on any of the mechanics that you use, like, not really.
No.
Most of them are really simple, like you said, the first boss, which is just a sheep, literally like a sheep in wolf's clothing almost, but it's not a wolf, it's like he's like some weird wizard looking thing,
with a pumpkin face.
It's just, you run over, you jump, you do a little bit of dodging, and then you spray it with fire, and that's about it. And it's like you said, almost every boss is just rinse, wash, and repeat of just that. And while you do use those mechanics throughout the game, it never really feels like a test. It never really feels like you're really having to struggle to play through these bosses. I would say the hardest boss is Nasty Nork, which makes sense because he's the final boss. Because that final boss, you have to catch the egg thieves or whatever to get keys, so that way you can unlock different segments of it. So like he's got like he's standing on top of these gates, and you have to unlock these gates so that way when you unlock them all, they turn into stairs and you can climb up and chase after Nork. So you have to chase after these egg thieves, who actually, instead of stealing eggs, are stealing keys, while Nork is shooting laser beams at you. But there's these tunnels you chase them around in. And honestly, that's the only time I've ever felt like the game tested you on any of the mechanics that you've learned, because you have to chase around egg thieves throughout a large portion of the game. And you also have to do, for like the flying stages, it kind of is a little reminiscent of that. Even though you're not flying, you're still trying to do stuff on a specific track or a specific path in order to achieve the next part of the level, or the next to progress in the game. And you get a key, you unlock a thing, you go fight another egg thief, get another key, unlock the thing, memorize their patterns so you can cut them off at the pass and get the key, and breathe fire on them, whatever you have to do. And then you have to chase Nork around, which I hated. This is one of the sections that I had to look up, because I was so confused with what exactly I had to do, because I was chasing Nork around for fucking ever. And I couldn't figure out how to catch up to him. And I'll be honest, dude, I still don't really understand how the fuck you're supposed to catch up to him. You just have to keep cutting corners. You have to get really good at cutting corners and doing everything you can to memorize the track pattern in order to basically take shortcuts, which is fine, but it's using a mechanic that was seldom used in the game. It wasn't the primary thing, and the final boss should be some type of amalgamation of every mechanic and skill that you've learned, and it really feels like it's focusing on just one: catching egg thieves. That's essentially all Nasty Nork is. He's a really complicated egg thief.
Yeah. And that's the thing as well. With so many of the bosses up to this point, it's just the most cut and paste rubbish. And the hardest thing about Nasty Nork is the environment, not the actual boss himself. When
Yeah.
I don't know if anything is less intimidating than the boss, where him running away is the hardest part of the level.
And I think that's really what the issue is. Like, I wouldn't mind if the level was was the challenge, like you having to play through a super complex level in order to beat the game. But when that super complex level is just you chasing Nasty Nork, it like they build him up as this nasty character, no pun, super
Hey,
pun intended, I guess. He's supposed to be this bigger than life, like bad person. And the moment you confront him, he's like, I gotta run away from Spyro,
oh
who's
no!
literally like less than a quarter of his size.
I mean,
It is just
Spyro is a
it
child dragon in this universe.
yeah, and it just completely takes the wind out of the sails of anything, any hype you were getting, any hype that Nork had going into the fight. And so you play it, and I'm like, this is it. It just does not feel satisfying in the slightest.
No, and I'd say that, barring possibly Blowhard, none of them really are satisfying, and that's a shame because the boss fight should be the exclamation point of the hub world. That should be like one of the standout moments, and instead it's one of the most forgettable parts of every world. I mean, granted, the boss comes after a bit of a level, and sometimes the level is actually more memorable than the actual boss itself.
Yeah.
I've lost more hits to the damn dogs in Toasty than Toasty himself.
Yes, 100%. That's where I died more often, was on the dogs than the stupid sheep thing
Yeah.
underneath the fucking
And
pumpkin man.
if the bosses weren't exactly the same throughout the entire game, that'd be a wonderful switch where suddenly the mini enemies are kind of actually more intimidating, and then you get the big joke reveal. It's a sheep on stilts. That would have been a great start if the rest of the bosses were good, but they're not.
Yep, and it's not to compare it to Mario, but I guess it's kind of a built-in comparison considering this game was a response to Mario 64.
That's an early 3D platformer, which is open world. You have to compare it to Mario.
Yeah, because Mario came first, and like the Mario bosses, I'm not saying Mario bosses are groundbreaking, but they're almost always fun. They you never feel I should say never, but you feel I personally I always feel a lot less dissatisfied with Mario bosses. Like the way you defeat Bowser is by a mechanic that you use in the very first boss of the game when you fight King Babam or Babam
Yeah.
or however you say it. It's a mechanic that you learned before and you use periodically throughout the game by having to pick up items or pick up things and throw them. So it's a mechanic that and on top of that, it's just moving. You have to dodge Bowser, so it's a big moving thing. It tests a whole bunch of things. Versus with this, I don't really feel like I tested anything. In all honesty, the best level that prepares you for Nasty Nork is treetops, and I hate treetops. It's not fun.
I love
That
treetops.
I love the intricacy of how it's laid out. I hate trying to find everything in it. I
Oh,
really did not enjoy it. I liked let me put it this way. I liked how unique and intricate all the different ramps and everything was, but I don't like how it was just in order to traverse it, it was always some type of like you have to take a boost here, you have to like do these long jumps here and there. So it simultaneously created this awesome experience of like, oh, there's always so much more to explore that you haven't seen in this level. But at
mm,
the same time, I'm like, man, if I want to get back to a spot to explore a little bit more there, I have to take this long, unnecessarily convoluted path just to get back to it.
yeah.
And so I think that was my main issue with it. And I realize now I never really got to say what my favorite and least favorite levels were.
Oh, yeah. So I was
Um,
talking too much.
no, no, no. I mean, it led into a good conversation about the music, and I don't have the same level of nostalgia of this game as you, so I can't remember every single level like you do, or as many levels. And I hate saying this because I feel like this is always like a cop out answer, but one of the first levels, Stonehill,
Hmm.
and the reason why I say that is because I'm a sucker for levels where part of the objective is to basically kind of go out of bounds,
Yeah.
but you don't quite know you have to go out of bounds yet. And you find out that when you do, like what you think is out of bounds actually isn't. And there's a whole part of the level to explore. And that's so cool to me. Like, because you look at you start off in kind of like this canyon that has like these castle walls surrounded by it and these towers, but you are eventually able to jump off one of the super high towers and get to the out of bounds area, or not out of bounds, but outside above these walls that you couldn't get out before.
Mm.
And so it gives you that sense of like, oh shit, I'm doing something the game developers didn't intend, when in fact they actually did intend, because there's gems and other stuff out there. But it's still, even though there's gems out there, still gives you that feeling of like you are breaking the game in some sense,
Mm.
and there's extra hidden stuff out there. And to me, it's just super fun. I really enjoy that aspect of games where you can go outside the bounds and you find out, oh, this was actually intended. So you
Mm.
get simultaneously the sense of satisfaction discovering something that you didn't think you were supposed to discover, but then also there's some extra cool bonus stuff out there. I don't know. I really love those types of
It's
levels,
the
but
great.
and that's why I like it.
It's the greatest example of a level that rewards exploration, which is what this game is all about. And it's a perfect starting
A
level. I completely agree with you. Very chill, very low challenge, lots of room to make mistakes, especially if you're getting used to charging. It's a very wide open space. But then taking that jump over the side to the beach and finding the key, it's rewarding exploration and getting you set up for the rest of the game. And if you didn't find it the first time, going back and finding it on a replay is incredibly satisfying. I can only imagine. I know that I know all the levels of this game inside and out, so none of it's a surprise to me. I don't remember finding that challenge for that secret for the first time. But yeah, as something to get you ready for what this game is, it's a pitch perfect start.
I also like, it's another early level town square, just
Oh,
because of
yeah.
how circular everything is. And by circular, I mean like there's lots of platforms that you climb up, you jump up and you explore, and then you can see an area that you have to get to a little bit later, and then you have to, how can I, circular in the sense that the routes that you get to different places overlap each other, and you can run and jump over different areas, and it's, or different areas that you traversed before to get to high areas higher up in the level. So it makes this kind of very circuitous, like things fold in on each other, different like areas fold in on each other. It makes the level feel super connected. So like even if you have a specific route to get to like kind of the top or like the one specific area, there's lots of different ways for you to get to it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's super cool. I
Yeah,
really enjoy that level a lot.
I like that, and I think the music for it great. Music for it is great too.
Well, if it's on the list, then you better send it to me. Well, but yeah, I don't. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about with this game, though, Chris? Before we wrap up, we've talked about the bosses, the levels. We've meticulously discussed the music. Is there anything else that I have not brought up that you would like to talk about?
I do enjoy that this game had a bonus cutscene for completing everything. That was a nice touch, and it's often when I thinking about games from this time, like Croc One, where if you find everything, you get a piece of writing on a still screen, and that's your ending. Having that little bit of extra care, I think, is what's the word? Consistent throughout the game. Apart from that, I think we've covered pretty much all of it. I've got my final thoughts, but apart from that, I think we've picked apart this game quite well.
What is that extra cutscene? Because I did get it, but I played this game about like 6 months ago, so I forget exactly what it was.
The final cutscene, there's an interview with Spyro who's wearing sunglasses, and they're just talking about nasty Gnork, as the interviewer says. And then the dragons all get frozen, and Spyro's like, "Oh no, here I go again." So it's a bit of a bullshit cutscene, but the fact they included it at least was nice.
Yeah, kind of dumb, but this game isn't known for its story necessarily, so
Oh,
I,
neither is
I can
Mario.
forgive it for that. Yeah, neither is Mario. You're right. So yeah, let's get into our final thoughts then, man. Like, I'll you know what? Let me give mine first, because I want to let you, the guest, the one who really adores this game, send off our listeners with a really pleasant final note on it.
Sure thing.
And not that my final thoughts aren't going to be pleasant. I really like this game. I was really pleasantly surprised how well it held up still all these years later. The controls surprisingly hold up super well, both on the D-pad as well as an analog stick, because I played my original PS1 version on my PS3, so I didn't play the Reignited trilogy. I didn't play with any modern updates in terms of quality of life improvements or anything like that. I played the original game. The only quality of life improvement that I had was being able to look up a guide if I got stuck on something, which wasn't very often, which is a testament to this game's design because I'm an impatient son of a bitch. And sometimes I look up stuff way earlier than I really should. And this game was just really well designed. There's a lot of charm in it. As much as I'm not a fan of Spyro's voice and his kind of like obnoxious character, that's actually something I forgot to bring up. When they were telling Charles Zambilis how to like what they were looking for with Spyro. They wanted him to be, hold on, I wrote it down. It was a combination of cute but also mischievous, bratty, and unpredictable. And that you can see that in the final version of the character. He's cute, bratty, a little unpredictable, but it's while I'm not a fan of the character, I still really enjoyed this game. I really like this type of platformer. I'm a huge fan of exploratory platformers, especially in 3D open worlds, especially when the worlds aren't fucking huge. Like this is the perfect size. Some of them are really big and it allows you to explore some, but then they also pare it down and make some really small condensed levels like town square. I like those types of levels where they can combine and it creates a nice juxtaposition between the two design styles. So yeah, I was really happy I finally got to play this game, and I'm a platformer fan, and this is one of the best out there.
That was very pleasant. You did a good job there.
Well, thank you. But Chris, your final thoughts. Let's wrap this episode up. Tell the listeners your final thoughts on this game.
Just before I start, I've got 2 fun facts for you. First of all, did you notice just thinking about things you were saying, did you notice the Parappa the Rapper reference in a Dark Passage?
I don't think so.
There's a point where one of the dragons says something like, "Oh, believe in yourself, Spyro, and you can achieve great things." And Spyro goes, "You've gotta believe," which of course is Parappa the Rapper's catchphrase.
Oh, I did not know that. I've never played Parappa the Rapper.
You're not missing out.
See, I've heard the opposite. I've heard it's really good. However, if you want to play it, you need to play it on an original CRT or whatever like HD remake of it. Because if you play the original on a CRT, like because it's all rhythm based and you have to account for like input delay when things are getting upscaled, it's a mess.
Yeah, no, I played the PS3 remaster and it was okay. But yes, there was another point, but I'm sure it'll come up in my next monologue. Spyro, for me, it's amazing to play a game that was on the precipice of greatness. Like, it was something that was going to become so much better, and it did. The 3 Spyro games created by Insomniac before they moved on are phenomenal. I mean, Spyro 3, Spyro 2, they take the base game and they improve it so drastically. And the reason Insomniac stopped making Spyro games is because after Spyro 3, they couldn't see what else they could do with the character. And they didn't want to make a game which was just, we've got to make a Spyro game, let's churn one out. I mean, Spyro 2, they added different moves like headbutting, swimming, things like that. In Spyro 3, they added different vehicles and they even included different characters. So they're constantly building it on top of it. And at the end of Spyro 3, they said, that's enough, we're done. And for Spyro 2 and 3, which I think are better games, much better games, just to go back and play Spyro 1 and consider how incredible it was for its time. The thing that always gets me, I always thought Spyro was a much earlier game. The fact Spyro 1 came out at the same time as Crash Bandicoot 3 is surprising to me, because Crash Bandicoot 1 and Spyro 1 seem almost like, equal to me. I mean, Crash 1 was called the Sonic's arse game because it was just Sonic, but from the perspective of Crash Bandicoot's arse.
Yep.
So I can appreciate that. But obviously, in a response to Mario 64, doing an open world attempt, that was a brave thing to do. And I think they really nailed it. Taking away certain parts of polish, like the music and certain things aside, it's just a fun game to play. I remember so many occasions as a kid just being like, ugh, it's a rainy Sunday, I want to do something. Let's look at my cabinet, what am I going to play? And Spyro 1 was more often than not up there, because I could be on any save point, be at any point, and I wouldn't need to relearn something. I wouldn't need to be aware of what the story was. I could just plug it in and play. And I think that's the game's greatest benefit, is that it's just such consistent fun the entire way through. I mean, I know I said I wouldn't talk about levels of polish. That helps. I mean, there was more polish as the games go on. But just the core game itself is just such a fun, easy experience. And I think that's what makes it really stand out. The fact it's just so easy just to sit down and play an hour, 2 hours, three, maybe if you get carried away like I frequently do. And what it led to makes the first game even better. The fact that Spyro 2 and Spyro 3 were such cataclysmic successes. And playing the first one, it's like, as I said earlier, when you watch a film and they do something that becomes a cliche, looking at the birth of it is lovely. Now, of course, Mario 64 is the birth of it, but I consider three games that I consider the godfathers of 3D gaming. One's Mario 64, one is Banjo-Kazooie, and one is Spyro the Dragon, because they both attempted the same thing but had it in drastically different ways. Mario 64 had more condensed levels and focused more on controllability and movement, moving in a 3D space, and it was of course very important to have that 2D step for Mario. He was a very important IP. Banjo-Kazooie perfected the collectathon side of things. Larger worlds, less of, but hidden things here and there. Spyro, I find, was the perfect meld between the two. The levels are bigger, obviously, than, say, Mario, smaller than Banjo-Kazooie, but it's got just an element of the collectathon, just an element of the objectives from both. And those three, I think, were really the defining points of platforming in the 3D genre. Platforming is my favorite genre by an absolute landslide, and it's so good to go back and play some of the originals. Spyro 2 and Spyro 3 are better games, but Spyro 1 is the one I always go back to, even though it's not the one I played first. I don't know what it is, there's just something about it that captures me. And sure, there's things about it I don't think are superb, but there's so many different moments where I'm just gazing upon this world and I'm looking at my next path to charge, my next enemy to flame, and it's just fun. It is just no holds barred, fun, easy gaming, and it's just something that sticks with me. Yes, the music obviously is a significant point for me, and it still sticks with me now. It is just the most.
I think it sticks with a lot of people, not just you. I'm not even going to try to defend my own point of view. I think the music in this speaks for itself, regardless of my feelings on it.
If I ever just want to sit down and just have a pleasant gaming experience, it's Spyro. Mario Galaxy is a very pleasant gaming experience and is my favorite game of all time. But there's a certain dramatic element to it, especially when it comes to boss fights, certain levels. Spyro is just that game where you can just chill out at any point, play, and it's satisfying. It is just a satisfying game. I absolutely adore this video game.
I think one point that you made that I think really kind of encapsulates all of our feelings for it is the pickup and playability of it. How easy it is for people to come back to this game and just stick around in it.
Yeah.
And I said it when we were talking about the game design, how they don't give Spyro a lot of verbs to use.
Mhm.
And that's a benefit because by being able to focus on only like 2 or 3 verbs, they really polish those specific verb sets. And that's why it's still fun to play Spyro, because it feels good just to run around, run, jump, and glide. I'm with you, man. It's a really strong showing, and I never really thought about like the big three in terms of 3D platforming in the 90s. I don't know. I'm not even saying this because I have another answer. I don't know if I would agree with the 3 you listed, but I can't think of 3 others besides Mario 64, Banjo. Because I would say, DK 64, but Banjo's a better collectathon than Donkey Kong 64 by a landslide.
That's been the big thing that's been on my mind all week. I was thinking about the big three because we're humans. We like threes, we like fives, we like tens. And I was thinking about
we like to categorize and organize things.
Exactly. And I was thinking about what would the big three be. Mario 64 is number 1, just because it did the transition and it was groundbreaking. Banjo, as you say, I was considering Donkey Kong 64, but I think the collectathon is better in Banjo, and it's also a better gaming experience
100%.
because you don't have all the damn backtracking. And I think Spyro is another one because while Banjo did have a lot of, collectathon and exploration parts of it, the main focus was collecting. The main focus of Spyro is exploring. And with each of those in mind, I think those cover what made platforming the way it is today. And as I've said, I'm the biggest platforming fan somewhere. And yeah, just to think so many things in this game that were done later on, Like the graphical things they did, like being able to make a big world and being able to glide seamlessly without loading times to any part of it. To make a moveset that was so simple that anybody could feel like they're a master at it in a few seconds. The most satisfying games are ones where after 10 minutes of playing, you feel like you know it inside and out. This really
Mhm.
perfected that. And I think the reasons that Spyro 2 and Spyro 3 are so good is because they had such a strong point to jump from already. As I will say to the audience, 2 and 3 are better games. 1 is just my favorite.
I can understand that. I can understand that. Well, I think that's a good place to leave off, sir. I mean, I think we've covered everything. I think we've gushed for. I mean, I know the episodes after all the edits, and I had a lot of stumbles. It's going to be less than 2 hours, but we're over 2 hours of recording, so I think we have sufficiently spiraled out of control on this episode. And I'm,
Oh, good lord.
yeah. Dad jokes are flying, baby.
All
It's
about it.
late at night and I'm ready to go. No, dude, thank you so much for joining me, Chris. This was a wonderful conversation. Yeah, where can the good people find you online? And is there anything you'd like to promote?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And I must say, I've been on a few podcasts with you now. This felt the most like just sitting in a pub having a conversation. This was really lovely. I've really enjoyed being able to talk about one of my favorite games. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm on Instagram, and that's pretty much the only place you'll find me. I'm under BritishBondAddict, and it is mainly a James Bond focused account. A few of the James Bond games slip in from time to time, but that's basically it for me. Apart from that, you'll probably hear me on some other gaming podcast at some point, I'm sure.
Probably another episode of mine at some point for some other game. I'm like, oh, you're a big fan of this that I didn't know that you sped run,
Well,
probably.
we did talk about Tomb Raider, right?
No, we haven't.
Oh, well, we talked about in chat about how I'm a Tomb Raider fan.
Yes, we. That is a game I actually need to beat. And now with the the recent announcement of the first three games being remastered for Switch, I might have to pick up a copy.
That there has been it's been a long time since a gaming announcement out of the blue has excited me as much as the Tomb Raider remasters. So excited.
Well, I'll keep you in mind for those inevitable episodes.
Please.
But that what? Sorry.
Please.
Okay. But I was about to say, yes, sir. I'm like, why am I why am I making myself like, why am I playing a character that's intimidated? Anyway,
Well, because you're still aware that there's 1,000 words on my desk by Monday.
yes, that's exactly what it is. But, but all right. Thank you everyone for listening. If you want to find more of me, you can find me on social media at Still Loading Pod on pretty much everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitch, Threads, all that good stuff. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can give me a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I like feeling warm and fuzzy. There's also merch. I always forget to shout this out. There is still loading podcast merch. It's a TeePublic site. I don't remember what the link is, but if you go to stillloadingpodcast.com, there is a link for the merch store there, as well as my other social media stuff, so you can check it all out there. Captain N t-shirts and all regular logo t-shirts and all that good stuff. But yeah, so stillloadingpodcast.com, there's a link to the merch site there. If you want to support the show monetarily besides getting some merch, you can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod for $1 a month. You'll get all the episodes a little bit earlier at better with a better bit rate, as well as access to patron voting rights, where you can choose future topics, where you can help me choose future topics for the show. Most recently, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII won the vote, so that's going to be a game that I cover on the show at some point once I beat it. So you can check that out for $1 a month. For $4 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned prior at the $1 tier, plus access to 2 bonus episodes. And then for $5 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned at the previous 2 tiers, plus access to Still Bonding, which is the only James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. Chris here has been on Still Bonding numerous times, as I've mentioned on the show. And actually, he will be on the episode we're recording in 2 days, which is going to be fun and exciting.
I'm on the next, I believe I'm on the next film, and I'm also in the film 2 days after that. Or two films after that,
2 months. Yes. Well, wait, no. Wait, are you talking about Tomorrow Never Dies?
Oh, wait. Sorry, I forgot about Dalton.
Yeah, we got all.
We've got to
I
delete this.
legit,
I'm a Bond fan. We can't have this in the chat. Make this is the blooper reel.
nope, it's leaving it in. If I have to take shit for my Stuart Copeland opinion, you're gonna take shit for that.
On that note, guys, $5 is pretty much a cup of coffee. 1 cup of coffee a month, worth it. Go for it. Do it. Come on, do
And
it.
you will get a shitload of still bonding. At this point, by the time this episode comes out, I believe the episode that we're talking about will be released because, this episode's coming out in November, and that episode will be an October one. So we are doing A View to a Kill will have already been out, and everything from Dr. No up to A View to a Kill. That's like what, 16, 15 Bond films by that point, more than that probably.
16 off the top of my head, which, to be fair, we also go into a lot of detail in our podcast on that, so you got some hours to catch up on, guys. Come on, I want that on my desk by Monday too. All of you out there.
Right, send your essays to British Bond Addict on Instagram,
Mr. British Bond Addict.
Mr. British Bond Act. Dear Mr. British Bond Act. Anyway, so that's all on patreon.com/stillloadingpod. And of course, my friends over at the Bit by Bit Foundation, got to shout them out. They do great work. If you donate to them, they put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, you can go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that is all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Chris, once again, my friend, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you ever so much for having me on. Again, it's a pleasure to talk about these video games, so thank you for giving me the opportunity. I can't thank you enough.
I love having you on, man. Looking forward to the inevitable Tomb Raider episode and whatever other games we end up figuring out in the future. So with all that said, listeners, thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.